So just for the record, can you tell me your name, your date of birth, and where you were born?
All right, my name is Kay Allen, and I was born on John Street at Prentice. And I came over here, I married my Silver Creek sweetheart, you know. And we lived in several places in South Louisiana because of his work with Mobil Oil Company. And we were moved to Dallas and spent some time there, had a great time. Then we came back to Prentice where we had saved our house. And then we started working on our camp house, as John called it, at Silver Creek on the branch, Williams Mill Creek. And we moved in. He was in Dallas at the time, and we were supposed to live in Dallas. We found a house and all that, and just before time to settle into a new house, they sent John to Africa, and they didn't let me go. But anyway, that was in about 1991, around that time, and now we're still there.
Tell me, what did your parents do for a living?
My daddy was a planter, and he owned a cotton gin in Prentice. And I'm telling you, that was an experience, because when the cotton came in, you never stopped until it was all ginned. He had a bed down there in his office, so many times he couldn't get home because they was lined up under that shed waiting to get their bale of cotton.
Tell me about how was religion part of your home?
What?
How was religion part of your home? Religion.
Oh, my daddy was a Methodist prude. I'm telling you, and there is a funny story I have to tell you. When we moved down to Lafayette, the First Baptist Church in Lafayette gave us a packet. And in that packet was the history of that church. And I was reading along, and all of a sudden it talked about this preacher and said, he left here and moved to Prentice. Well, I didn't know a thing about him, so next time I saw Mom and Daddy, I asked, and they both just died laughing when I asked. What happened was, that preacher was kind of a hard-nosed fellow, and he told Mother, he says, we're going to have to do something about Kirby. And she said, what's the matter with him? Well, he needs to be over here in this Baptist church to get himself immersed, or I'm afraid he might go to the devil. Well, a few months later, the Methodist church had a revival, and when they opened the doors of the church, my mama just marched herself down to join the Methodist church. And Daddy said, well, Neva, I didn't know you were going to do such a thing. You didn't even tell me. She says, well, it's like this. If you're going to hell, I'm going with you. And that's the way I felt about my husband. Lord have mercy. To have a good marriage, it's just remarkable. And it's getting fewer and fewer as time goes on.
Tell me about the house that you grew up in Prentice.
Well, the first house I was born to was on John Street, and it's still beautiful, and it's still being taken care of and used. And then we moved into Big Town, which was like a block from the school. Well, everybody in the area had children. And we all gathered in my front yard, and we played baseball every day without fail. And Jimmy Harvey, that lives here in Monticello, was one of my classmates, and you know, he was born without one of his hands. And he had worked himself to where he could grab that ball and pitch it and get rid of it, and just absolutely fascinating how he trained himself to play just like the other guys. And we always wanted Jimmy on our side. And then he came over here and married Annette, and he just has done so well. And I've thought many, many times we should have known, because he handled that one-hand business better than anybody in the world.
Was there ever a time when you were growing up that money was tight? to your knowledge?
Well, I guess you would have to say all of my young life that people had a hard time, because when the banks closed and all that, what do you call it?
The run on the banks?
Oh. Anyway, our country people didn't suffer like the city people, because we had cows and chickens and hogs and beef. We had all of that, and we grew our vegetables. You never would expect it to be like Walmart, because everything was done in the home, in the yard, and everything for everything that we needed, we had. So we didn't really need a lot of money. You had to save money to pay the taxes. But we didn't need money for going to the store and all that sort of thing. That all happened in my lifetime.
And you told me about how your father ran the cotton gin, and then the federal government started paying them to shut down the cotton gins. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it was devastating. Davis County has never recovered, because that was the cash crop. That's what they sold to have to live on for the year. And and I don't know how much acreage went for that. When the people from the Delta came down and bought all the farmers' interest, I guess it must have been easier for them and more money to just give up their cotton allotment. But they did the same thing to the pigs. I don't know how they managed that. But I do know that my grandfather lived on John Street, and he kept a pig in the backyard, way away from the house, and it was against the law. And they'd tell him that he had to get rid of the hog, and he'd say, why are you telling me? It's my hog. I can do with it what I want to. So government things started coming into the communities around the 40s, right around the end of the war. And we have more regulations now than we can count.
What are some foods you remember from your childhood?
Goodness. I remember Mary Lena's pound cake. She worked for us, and we're still close to this day. And I loved the ground cornmeal. I would go out to the lot and do the corn on the box that we had, that you ran your corn through there and it shelled it for you. And then I'd put it in a sack and take it to the miller in Prentice, in the town, and he would grind it, and then I'd go back home with a big old lard can full of, and as a result of that, I still get my corn ground like I want it. Preacher Rester over at Civil Creek has a grinder, and so I'll go get a 50-pound sack of corn. And he said, I don't know why you want to do so much. I said, I've got a lot of people depending on me to bring them some real cornmeal. So I do cling to the old ways.
Since we're around Christmas time, tell me about what your family did on Christmas when you were growing up.
Well, of course, we sang and sang and sang, and we went to church every time you looked up. We had to go to church, because that was just part of our upbringing. And I remember I was 10 years old, and I loved music even back then. And I would hurry up and get out of Sunday school and get on the pew that was closest to the choir, and then I'd lean forward. And Miss Annie Rose Smith, who was a legend in Davis County, just went down there, and she was the music leader, that's what they had there. And she took me by the hand and put me in that choir, and I was 10 years old. And I am still singing in the choir, forever. But it was, the the church was where we were, where we lived, it was a big thing in my childhood. And of course we went to all the Bible schools. We loved to go to the Bible school at the Baptist church because they did such great crafts. We loved to go to the one at the Presbyterian church because I loved to go hear them sing because they could drag a hymn out for 30 minutes. And then we just, at the Methodist church, we thought we were just the doings. But we did a lot of very hard music back in the day. And now they have a hard time just getting a pianist.
And I know you lived in Jeff Davis County for a lot of your life. Can you tell me about the community that you grew up in Jeff Davis County?
Well, one thing that came to mind, and I don't know why, is one of our classmates had a store uptown. And everything was so rationed, every now and then he could get bubble gum. And he would hide it and wait for all of us in the class to get our bubble gum before they'd put it out for everybody else. That was exciting. But anyway, every store did well. They had and now they're just getting abandoned, falling in. And I know there's one that belonged to Harless Everett. And of course they've got kinfolks over here. And the roof just fell in. So they left the front, the facade like it was, and cleaned up everything inside, and they don't know what they're going to do with it, but they could have a park in the middle of town. But nobody shops in town anymore.
I know you lived in town in Prentice, but what was going to town like for you? Did you go to Columbia or Monticello or Brookhaven?
We could get anything we wanted in Prentice. That's the way the small towns were at that time, because usually, well, it was a treat to go to Jackson. And I had to go with my friend. She was born in June and I was born in July. And we were connected from then on. We even went off to college in room together. But we had, you just could get anything you wanted there. You didn't have to go to Hattiesburg or Columbia or anywhere like that. You could go to town and do your shopping and come home.
Tell me about the schools you attended. What was it like for you?
That was an interesting thing. We started out at Prentice Elementary in the first grade. And we had a mean old first grade teacher. You know, usually first grades have sweet little ladies, but now this woman, I would take my lunch and Mother would get these little bottles of milk, and one of our classmates knocked it off on the floor and broke it, and she grabbed me up and made me go find Ed, who was a caretaker, and get his broom and his this and his that, and I might have been that tall, you know, and I had to clean that up. And that was my first remembrance of first grade. I thought that was just uncalled for. I guess she didn't want me bringing milk to school, so that was to teach me a lesson. Anyway, we were all starting to school together. There were about 60 of us, and we went all the way through. But I had a problem in reading. It was not dyslexia, but I was supposed to have been a left-handed person, and they wouldn't let you be, and that kind of messed up I had to go and change glasses to get my eyes to the strength that they needed to be for me to be able to use the right hand. So I learned that at an early age, and I got to the 5th grade, and Miss Odie was our teacher, and oh, she could scare the life out of everybody. But she was a precious person. And Daddy came into lunch one day and he says, I heard the best news I ever heard. And we just couldn't wait to hear it. And it was Miss Odie was going to be my teacher next year. Well, I suffered the whole summer because all I knew with Miss Odie was she used to stand down the end of the hall where there was great stairs that went down to level, and she had that paddle holding on to it, and I knew those were going to be my last days. Well, anyway, make a long story short, she took me under her wing, and she told my daddy to go to Hattiesburg to Dr. Pulliam and get Kay to where she can read. And so he did. And I had to go to Dr. Green and have my glasses changed every so often so it would fit my right-handedness. And things like that in our school, you wouldn't think we could do anything about a child with reading problems. But we didn't have it in the school, but we knew where to go to get help, is what I mean. And now I cannot stand it if I have to stay in my house and I don't have a book to read.
What did you do after finishing school?
Went to Belhaven with my best friend, and it was a fine experience. And it's so funny now that I'm 80 years old, I want to go back to the First Presbyterian Church. Because even though I wasn't a Presbyterian and never have been a Presbyterian, that's where we went. When you got scholarships, you had to sing in that choir. And that's one of my things on my bucket list. Because when we got in and everybody got seated, then what was the governor's name? Hugh L. White. He always wore a white suit. And his wife always wore a blue, that blue that all the older women love. And anyway, everybody would be seated, and here would come the governor and his wife, and they had a certain place they had to sit. And then the people that guarded them had to be with them too. And I always remember it was kind of like, here comes the queen. And then when they get settled, then everybody could go on with their worship service. But when I can't go to church, I always dial them up. And that's my church service.
Tell me about, after finishing Belhaven, did you move back to Prentice? Or tell me about what...
I went from Belhaven to Southern, and so they had a quarter system and you could get through quicker, which I love that. And then I married John. I was 20 and he was 23, and that was normal back then. That wasn't considered too young. But anyway, we got engaged on December the 20th, and then we married the next December the 20th. That's coming right up.
Yeah.
But I don't have my John anymore. He died in the end of July. So we're still trying to cope. It's not easy.
So tell me about when you moved to Lawrence County, about your decision to move back to Silver Creek and what you've been doing since you moved.
Well, John always wanted to build a house in a certain spot on that creek. And so we decided we better go ahead and do it. And so we started the house, and of course I had an eye for adding on, because knowing my husband and how he loved Silver Creek, I figured we'd be moving over there at some point in time. So we had an overview of what we planned to do, and that's when we started. And it was quite an adventure. We had saved old material from other places and different, like stair railings and that sort of thing. And we wrote our plan on the back of a piece of wallpaper because it was wide enough that we could get it all on there. So that's what we did. And he absolutely loved it. And everybody that came to visit, he'd put them on the golf cart and give them a tour. But he came up there as a child on that place, and that was where his heart was. And I said, it doesn't seem quite fair that I'm left alive living on that place that he loves so. But it's comforting.
And tell me about when you started working here at the Lawrence County Regional History Museum?
Okay. I was in my house and I heard some talking out in the yard. And I thought, well, somebody must have come, but they wouldn't knock on the door, so I got up and went to the door and opened it, and it was Miss Clinton. And her help was Dolores, I think her name was. And they were going out through the yard just looking at this and looking at that. And she heard that I was a history buff and a history teacher. So she came in and told me that I must get involved. With Miss Clinton, you had no choice. And I always thought it was so funny. If she told somebody to do something, they'd do it. And that was a special talent of hers. And she had quite a few of her age group that wanted this building to be the cornerstone of the town. So she asked me if I would come to the museum meetings, and I was tickled to death to do that. And that's how I got involved. And I'm trying to think of the names. Parm Williams, Miss Clinton, Joan Hartzog, and I can't get all the names. Anyway, they got the town to give it to us. And it's supposed to be run for the town with a board on, in the building, which that's what we do now. But it was amazing when people found out we were having a museum. They'd come up here in droves to bring this, knowing that it could get lost if they had it in their own family. And anyway, they met with the archives and history after they got the deed and everything done, and had him come down to look at the building and listen to us and what we wanted. Well, they just thought that was the neatest idea and went back and met. I love archives and history. They've just been nothing but good to me the whole time I've worked with them. Anyway, they gave us a $100,000 grant, but 50 of that had to be to develop the museum. So when you see the big room downstairs, that's where it started. Because we had to put up new ceilings, and everything was painted turquoise. And I mentioned one day it must have been free somewhere. They said, yeah, that's right. But they approved and followed us through. And we, in grants, you have to do it like they say do, but they're never unreasonable. So we had to take each room, one at a time. We'd get up a little money and we'd do the ceiling, and then we'd get that room done with the air conditioning, and then go to the next room. And it was all volunteers. Merle Griffith, now see, that's her maiden name, Merle Buffkin, and I were raised together in Prentice. And one day we were down in that hall just a painting, and I got tickled. She said, well, what happened that made you so laugh? So I said, Merle, do you realize what we're doing? We're over here painting the Monticello High School. And she just died laughing, because we were big rivals. And every time we'd get up a little money, we'd do something else and do something else. And Merle was right there with Charles. They were the movers and shakers also. But at this time, the community wanted something. And they all came together and they did this room first, so we could use it for fundraisers to raise money to go on to the next phase. And then I worked with them to do the floors. We did the floors with a grant from Archives and History. And when we got through, I told the lady that in Archives and History, I said, I was scared to death to deal with y'all, but y'all have been just gracious and wonderful to help me get through this. And she says, well, honey, we are a bureaucracy, but we try not to act like it. But everything we've done with them has been a great thing. We're going to go knocking on their door again pretty soon.
Tell me about some of the exhibits in the museum.
Well, one day John and I were at the kitchen table, and this man drove up in a pickup, and we watched him get out, and he climbed the steps. And when we went to the door, he said he was Swan Ward, and that he had things for the museum that he knew that we would like to have, and would we come check them out. So here we go down to Arm, and he used to be the garbage man for Lawrence County. And so he would find things that didn't need to be thrown away, and he saved them in these little houses, little storehouses behind there. And it took 3 pickup loads to get them all to my house, and then we had to get the rust off of them and get them ready to display. So this end right here at the corner down on the first floor, that became our implements room. And I kind of am in charge of that because I was raised right in the middle of my daddy's farming, and you know, I was a big part of that community because he had me doing stuff that usually little boys do. He just couldn't let that go. But it just has meant so much to me. But that's the room that when the children come to the museum, they love it best. They just can't imagine what a mule is, and the mule pulled the plows. They thought the men pulled the plows. So we all get lessons in blacksmithing and how to plow a garden when they come and visit, and they love all that, and it's a room full. Have you been down there? It's really great. But everybody was so gracious to give us things that they thought would continue past their lifetime. So it's been great fun.
Tell me about what do you see as the value of having a history museum in Lawrence County, preserving the history of Lawrence County?
Well, one thing, we have one of the best histories in the whole state. We are the original backwoods people. And I always tell my friends, you know, if anybody calls you a backwoods person, you are. I think that the children, we have the 4th grades all over come, because that's when they're studying history. And the value of having this teaches these children, and then adults too, what our past was. And it's a fabulous history, because we were the first backwoods community. And in 1814, I would say, we had 2,000 people in Monticello. And that is where all the paperwork and all that went for us to become a state. And so they met here, and they would go down to Columbia by way of the river, and they formed a delegation that started to go to Washington to petition the federal government to make Lawrence County a state, which they did, but they did it before our delegation could even get there. So it was, I guess everybody was in agreement that it should happen. But now our Lawrence County was almost from one state line way past Brookhaven. The reason that we were so successful in Monticello at an early age is because we have the river right out there. We include that in our tour because that's where the people came down the river to get their land grants and start farming. Now, the St. Stephen's Road came from Alabama, and it traveled on, it followed the path that the Indians took. And it met right behind here, the river and the road. And that's a tremendous history. And we had 3 governors, and of course we needed to put them out so people could see it. But this was the place to be. People came in from all over to build stores and make their livings and do their farming. And we had a lot of export business like whiskey. That was before we had all these regulations for that. And molasses, and of course cotton, and corn and everything that grew on these plantations up and down the river. So it was a great spot to be. And they didn't build the bridge over here, the one we come in on 84 or 184, until 1938. So they were still coming on that St. Stephen's Road and still coming down the river. And so this was quite the place to be in those early years. And children need to know that. I don't know why. I can't tell you why. It's just they need to know that.
So can anybody donate materials to the museum?
Yes. Yep, and people send us money along, which is great, and we still have our gala. Every February we have our gala, and we have raised tons of money with the gala because all the, like GP, of course, funded us, and not Mississippi Power, what's that? Southern Pine, and when we have our gala, they are allowed so many tickets. Atlas Bucket, do you know about Atlas Bucket? And just a lot of plain, everyday people that wanted this to happen. So we've had about, maybe 23 galas. And of course, the first one they had Kirk Fordyce and his wife, and the one where we were celebrating our 200th celebration, our present governor came and his wife, and they were just adorable. And they were thrilled to death. Our guests that come are just thrilled to death about what we've done. And it's all about volunteerism.
So can you tell me, just getting back to just talking generally about Lawrence County, how, I know you've been here since the 90s, but you've been in this area your whole life.
Oh, absolutely.
How has Lawrence County changed over your lifetime?
I don't like the fact that we have to go to Hattiesburg or Brookhaven to buy what we need. One day on a Sunday, I ran out of white thread. And I was just fussing, sitting in my little chair because I couldn't believe I let myself get out of white thread. And John said, well, I don't know what you're stressing about, just get in the car and go to Monticello to get some. I said, reality check. You can't hardly buy anything in your hometown anymore. And that's sad. It really is. And you used to have people that everybody, it's like you had the mercantile that sold material to make your clothes out of. And then you had the TV people that fixed your televisions, which, that in the early days, that went on a lot. It's not like today. You had plenty of groceries. We had the farmers come in their little trucks to bring their fresh produce and eggs and milk and whatever you raised on the farm, and went through the town just blowing his horn, and it was a lot of fun to follow him. But the mamas would come out and buy what they wanted off the truck, so we didn't need to have to go to Columbia or Brookhaven or anywhere else. We could buy everything we wanted and everything we needed right there in Prentiss, and the same with Monticello, all our small towns. And of course we had great manufacturing in all our small towns until NAFTA came in, and that changed everything. I know in Prentiss we had 600 working at one factory and about 200 working at another factory, and they closed up. They're still sitting over there empty, and the same thing over here with they used to manufacture fine clothes from here for the designing people. And that just, when they had a picture in the paper of the last worker leaving the factory over there, and I got me several copies of the paper, and I cut them out and I sent them to every one of my senators and representatives. And I said, I know this is not going to stop anything, but if we got to look at it, you have to look at it too. I'm bad about that.
So tell me, what do you like about the present day Lawrence County and living here?
Well, gosh, there's a lot I like. I have loved being a part of this Civic Center restoration. And we did plays. I got to be Clary in Steel Magnolias, and people still talk about it when I go to town. They love that play. And the thing about it is, I thought, I don't know why we're doing this. I mean, the greatest actresses in the world have done this already, and now we got to measure up to that, but it got the same kind of reception. And people still want us to do it again, but those of us who were in it are just too old to do that now. But we became great friends, and you can see down on the wall where we've got the pictures of all the plays we've done. And we did a Best of Broadway. Were you here when we did that?
I wasn't here for the Best of Broadway.
Well, we had all the children that tried out, and we used every one of them. You know, we didn't want anybody to count the children in Sound of Music. Because everybody wanted to be in the Sound of Music, so we just fixed them a costume and put them in it. That was a lot of fun. Lot of fun. And it was good for the children. Now these children are getting married, they have jobs, and they're getting out of college, and it's like, I can't believe that time went by so fast.
So last question, unless there's something else you want to add after this. What would you say is your best piece of advice for future Lawrence Countyans who are watching this, you know, in a couple months or 50 years from now?
Now say that again.
What would you say is your best piece of advice for people who are in Lawrence County who will be watching this one day?
Get themselves involved in community activities. We have lost our clubs, 3 to be exact. We still have the garden club, and we're all getting too old to we've just done a lot for the town. And our volunteer people are getting small. And I don't understand, because, you know, we welcome people to help in any way they want to in this building. And I don't know what it's going to take to get volunteers going again, because this building wouldn't be like it is had it not been for the volunteers. And they just hunkered down and did it like it was their very own house that they were trying to restore. And we see, all of us talk about this a lot, because I used to be considered the youngest one. Which that's not the case anymore, but we don't see the volunteers coming forth, and I'm afraid it's going to show in another 50 years, because we need young people, older people, everybody needs to be involved, because we have the park over here, and that was done in your lifetime, and you just don't go by that park if there's not somebody walking the trail or somebody's on the overlook gotten lunch. And when the children, my grandchildren were little, I'd come over here and we'd go get us a hamburger or something, and then we'd go straight to the park if it was a pretty day and have our lunch on the overlook looking over the river. And if it wasn't a pretty day, we'd go to the Longino house and eat in the dining room. And my children just love that. My grandson, who is now 12, he told me a couple of years back, he says, you know, when I grow up, I'm going to live in the Longino house. I said, oh, you are? Yeah, I want to live right here, and I'm going to have my business in the Civic Center. That shows how much they came with me when when they were in my care and we had things to do. We just all went together. And Carrie Grace, I don't know if you know Carrie Grace. Anyway, that's my oldest granddaughter. She went to just about every meeting that we had. And I felt so sorry for her, because one day we just had the longest meeting, and I felt so sorry for her, and I was wanting them to hurry up so we could leave. And when we got in the car, she says, "Oh, Danny, wasn't that the most fun?" So I realized they gained from it. Maybe one day they'll grow up and help in community efforts.
So is there anything else that you'd like to add before we end the interview?
Well, there's so many people. I wish I had a list of everybody, but Parm Williams was the banker over here before it was, you know, they've changed the names so much. But he worked with Miss Clinton, and we have pictures somewhere of the Department of Archives and History came down and looked over everything and decided whether we were worthy of having a grant, which we were, and they kind of followed us through this. And then we did another grant to do the floors in here just lately, so it hadn't been but about maybe 3 years that we finished doing this upstairs flooring. So we're really in good shape, but you still got to keep it going, and we're not a profit-making thing, so we try to hold our costs down to where the people in Lawrence County can enjoy it and afford it. And nowadays, they're going off onto these destination weddings, and that hurts us. That's like going to Walmart instead of using Ramey's over here. But anyway, I can't imagine, I would have never imagined when I was, say, 10 years old and living in small town USA that we would come to where we are today.
Well, thank you very much, Miss Kay. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. And there's millions and millions of more stories.